What's up, Mythic Legions fans and everyone joining me? I almost said Mythic Legions Cabal. What a throwback to the old show. What's up, YouTube? Welcome to Mythic Conversations Wednesday night. Thank you all for joining. 7:30. I've been sitting here waiting for the clock to tick over to 7:30 so I can hit the go live button and start the show. And even then, I started the show and I fumbled my first introduction. But whatever, we'll get past that. Anthony, thank God it's Wednesday. TGIW. Chris, what's up, buddy? Nice to have you here. Thanks for joining. Whew, it is warm down here in the basement tonight. Let me tell you, I have to actually turn the air conditioner off when the show goes live because it's just way too loud. So it is a bit warm down here, but that's okay. That must just be because all the love that I'm feeling for the show from Mythic Conversations. Tonight's going to be a fun one. If you can see behind me on the table, we've got a whole lineup of blasted orcs. Orcs are going to be the conversation tonight. I posted a few orc customs this week. I posted an orc god, Grummish the One-Eyed. I posted an orc cleric today, kind of as a build-up to a conversation that I thought would be fun, just to look at some of the orcs of Mythic Legions, some of the ones that they've given us, as well as some of the customs I've done, hopefully give you a few ideas. I know some people really love the orcs, so good topic for conversation this evening, I thought. Drew, nice to have you here. Alexander, very much. Thank you for joining. Let me get it started like every week. Welcome to Mythic Conversations. If you are joining for the first time and you are unfamiliar with who I am Jeremy Gerard. I am a Mythic Legions collector and customizer. You can see my collection behind me filled with not only Mythic Legions factory produced figures, but also some of the customs that I create. If you want to see some of those customs, you can do so on Instagram. My Instagram feed is at Mythic Customs, all one word. You can also check out all of my customs, including a lot of the stuff we're going to look at tonight on my website. That is www.mythiccustoms.com. Again, all one word. I share tons of pictures and recipes and all that on my website. And of course, I am here on YouTube every Wednesday night doing this show live, Mythic Conversations. I also post little short customizing tutorial videos on this YouTube channel, so you can subscribe and check that out as well. In addition to the customizing and all that I do with Mythic Legions, I also have the distinct privilege of working with Four Horsemen Studios as their digital marketing manager, which means everything you see at sourcehorseman.com is stuff that I help bring to you. So with that, like I said, tonight's topic of conversation is going to be all around orcs. But before we get into that, I'm going to do a little Mythic Legions news, kind of talk to you about some of the stuff that's been going on, if not in Mythic Legions world, at least in the toy world. And then throughout the evening, we'll have a conversation, we'll answer questions. That's about it, right? Okay. Orcs, Drew said. Yes. Hello, Nicholas. So what's been going on? Like last week, not a ton going on in the world of Mythic Legions right now. There's definitely stuff brewing. I had a great conversation with Joe this week, Joe Viteri, my partner in Legions Con. We are putting some finishing touches on some plans for that. Hope to have some announcements on that very soon. Obviously, we're still dealing with COVID. New Jersey's still going through some challenges and everything, restricting some people from even coming into the state. So it poses some challenges with doing a show, but we've got some cool ideas. We've got some plans, and we're hoping to announce all that very soon. Other news, actually, right before this show went on, Walter from the Mythic Legions Cabal, he went live in the Cabal. I tuned in there. I had a little bit of time on my hands, so I tuned in there and kind of joined the conversation, and a bunch of people were back and forth. And one of the things that they talked a bit about in that show was the Disney what do they call it? The Ultimates, the Super 7 Ultimates Disney line that just got revealed this week. Why is that tie into Mythic Legions? Because it's Four Horsemen. So Four Horsemen Studios obviously does a ton of work with Super 7, especially on their Ultimates line, whether it's the Thundercats, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles stuff. Nate Barch, who helped design those new Ninja Turtles that are coming out. He just posted today the satisfaction of having to help design these new toys and then actually having them in hand. He posted some pictures of some of the in-hand turtles from Wave 1. And again, these are the Super 7 Turtles, the ones that are based on the old toy line. Turtles is a crazy line. There's so many different things coming out between Playmates and what NECA's doing and Super 7, but I'm speaking about the Super 7 stuff. So obviously Four Horsemen Studios has a huge hand in that, as they did with these apparent Disney figures. Not totally my cup of tea. Walter on the Cabal was saying that he's a huge Disney fan, very much enjoys the characters and the properties, but for him, it's a limitation of money and room. And I kind of fall in that same camp. I only have so much room to display. I like most toy collectors, I'm regularly turning over in the collection, not only to raise money to buy other things I may want, but also to make room. There is a finite amount of room that I can display stuff in. So that's kind of how I feel about the Disney line. I think it's going to be a pick and choose line for me. There are a couple Disney characters that I admit I would not be able to avoid buying a Four Horsemen Studios produced Winnie the Pooh. That was ironically the one that Walter said he would be really interested in as well. Winnie the Pooh and Eeyore, I said that if they do Winnie the Pooh and Eeyore, I promise you, I'm going to buy those and I'm going to customize them. I'm going to make Pooh like some kind of cool warrior, and I'm going to make Eeyore his mighty steed, because that would be really, really cool. But I'm sure there are some other Disney characters as well that I wouldn't be able to turn down adding. Cool line, obviously they did a Mickey in Wave 1. They did Sorcerer's Apprentice Mickey, but then they also did Pinocchio, which was kind of a weird choice, and Little John from Robin Hood, which again, wow, really obscure type character. So that's kind of cool. Really neat to see that they're apparently going to go and do some. It's not just going to be like Mickey and Goofy and Winnie the Pooh. They're going to do some obscure characters. So that's kind of cool. I know Corn Boy posted that in the online on Facebook, and they were obviously super excited and super proud about that. Seems like the soft goods, that's some work that C. Jessam did with them as well. So yet another example of C. Jessam doing the prototypes of those soft goods like they did on the Thundercats Mum-Ra figure. The soft goods on these look really, really nice. Not bulky, looks like they fit really well, which once again gives me a lot of positive hope for robed wizards in Mythic Legions, knowing that C. Jessam is going to have a hand in those prototype robes, those soft goods. And Matt, actually, so thank you very much. I said there isn't any news in Mythic Legions, and Matt rightfully reminded me there's a sale this weekend. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, that is actually some pretty important big news. So the PowerCon 2020 figures. This is Lord Dragul and Dorina Oneros. Those figures are going to be for sale this weekend. So if you saw the news post, it was actually, not only in the Cabal and on Facebook and stuff, it's also on sourcehorseman.com. There's a press release. Actually, the big homepage billboard image is all about this. So obviously PowerCon 2020 was canceled this year, like pretty much every other convention because of COVID. But the Horsemen had already placed that order for the small run of the PowerCon debut figures. So you'll notice that the studio never uses the language PowerCon exclusive, because these figures are not exclusive to PowerCon. That is actually something that's very, very important to the studio. They don't want fans to get shut out, which, I mean, as a fan, I super appreciate. I super appreciate that you don't have to deal with not only, trying to go to the con or, buy like some little tiny window where, that's the only time you're going to get them. Otherwise, you're going to pay 5 times as much on eBay afterwards. I appreciate the fact that when they release something, even if they release it early at some place like PowerCon, they also make them available for pre-order in larger quantities. So Darina Oneros and Lord Dragul, they are part of All Stars 3. They were already pre-ordered. Those are already in production. They're at the factory. All Stars 3, because it's an All Stars wave, even though those 2 new figures were included, there are no new parts on those figures. There's no new tooling to be done. So whenever they can make a figure without new tooling, without them having to actually cut those molds like they did, the Arethyr wave has tons of new tooling in it. That takes a lot longer. So All Stars is in production. Those figures are part of it, but this weekend will be your shot to get them months early. This is what they do every single year. Usually it's live at the show, and they have a limited amount to sell on Saturday and a limited amount to sell on Sunday. Matt is asking, will there be 70 per day on Saturday and Sunday? I don't know what the numbers are. I don't know where you came up with that number of 70. I haven't seen any definitive numbers of how many sets there are going to be, but they did say that they are going to have a certain amount on Saturday and a certain amount on Sunday. So it's not like it goes for sale Saturday and they're just going to sell the entire stock and then forget about Sunday. What they do at the show, because the show normally is 2 days, is exactly that. They split up however many they have. They sell a number of them on Saturday until they're gone, and then they sell the rest of them on Sunday. So they're trying to replicate that as much as possible. This coming weekend is when PowerCon would have been scheduled, so that's why they're doing it this weekend. All that information, once again, is on Source Horseman. I believe it was 2 p.m. Eastern, I think, is when they're going to put them live. I could be wrong about that. Check the exact time, but I mean, I'm the one that wrote it on the website. I think that's what I wrote. But yeah, so very, very cool. If you want to get them early, again, there's a limited amount of sets. So if you go and you miss out, please don't be super, super disappointed. They will be only sold as a set of 2, $80 plus shipping per set. Saba, nice to have you here. If you didn't see this week, a couple days ago, actually yesterday, on sourcehorseman.com, I published a really cool interview with Saba and Juliet from Planetary Dog Toys. I actually got a cool piece from Planetary that's part of what I'm showing tonight. Really, really great artists and even better people. Check out that interview on sourcehorseman.com. Learn a little bit more about those 2 great artists and what they do. Matt saying that's what they said in the past with PowerCon figures. Yeah, it could be. I mean, 70 sets, a case. So a case is what, 24 in a case or 12? I'm trying to think. I think a retailer case is 24. That's what a retailer case actually is. So 70, I mean, maybe. I don't know the exact numbers, but it definitely will be exciting. So something to look forward to this weekend. But once again, if you miss out, it's not like you don't have access to these figures. They already were available as part of All Stars. You can buy them for pre-order on some of the retailers like Big Bad Toy Store and stuff now as well. Other than that, so one cool thing I got today, a lot of people are always asking about what figures go with Mythic Legions, obviously, because especially if you're new to the line, and you've picked up the ones you want from Big Bad and you've placed some pre-orders and now you're waiting for them to come in, if there's nothing new to buy, you'll start looking at other lines and you're like, well, what other lines can I kind of fudge into Mythic Legions? And I'm not a huge fan of doing that. I've talked about this. because my collection is so large, I don't have a lot of room to fudge in other figures that aren't Mythic Legions. But I know a lot of people do that. So outside of Mythic Legions, I'm a toy collector. I'm a toy fan. I like cool looking toys. So this was something I saw a while ago that I thought was really, really cool as a toy. And I think a lot of people are going to actually use these with Mythic Legions, if nothing more than just the weapons. So this is the Alpha Predator, the 100th edition Predator from NECA. So I have to assume I have a handful of NECA Predator figures, just random ones that I thought looked cool. I have to assume that this is the 100th one they have produced. And as such, it's a cool figure. One of the things with Predator that I think makes it hard to fudge it into Mythic Legions is, you know, they've got alien technology. He's got a gun, you know, a cannon on his shoulder and wires and stuff. That doesn't really play with Mythic Legions. This particular character, the backstory that they wrote here is about how the race was, you know, very, very primitive. They call the race the Yutja. It's Yautja. I'm not sure how to say that. I feel like that's something. I mean, obviously, I didn't remember that from the movie Predator, so that's probably something that's come out in the lore from comic books and stuff. But this is a very primitive-looking Predator. So all of the armor, he doesn't have any like cannons and guns and stuff. It's all blades and bone. Like he's got a spear that's all like jawbones lashed to a stick. You know, on his arm here, instead of the iconic like Predator metal claws that come out of the gauntlet, he's got like some jawbones that are lashed to his arm. Really, really cool looking figure. He's got like this cool hook that's like a bone weapon. And he does have a mask. You know, Predator obviously always has the kind of mask that he wears. This one looks very insectoid. So it's bones and insect-like looking mask. Does not look like technology based at all. Really cool figure. It's actually a big figure, so it will kind of tower over your Mythic Legions. I've got an ogre here, and I mean he's a little bit shorter than the ogre, not by a whole lot. So very, very cool figure. I pre-ordered this from Big Bad Toy Store months and months ago. Apparently they're shipping now. I've seen a few other people posting that they have it. I haven't even had time to open the box yet, but I had it today, so I figured, you know what? Let me show that on the show tonight, because once again, I do think that some people, if nothing more than that cool staff, I could see them using that in their Mythic Legions displays or their Mythic Legions customs. Really cool figure. Awesome. So with that, let's turn to the topic at hand. Let's talk a little bit about orcs. As I said earlier, orcs are one of the many races in Mythic Legions. One of the cool things about the Mythic Legions line is because it's made up of a number of fantasy races, including a lot of very, very typical fantasy trope type races. You know, you've got elves, goblins, orcs, obviously humans, but, you know, barbarians. You've got all of those type of characters. Plus, they've also thrown in some characters, some kinds of races that they created that they think are cool. I mean, I mentioned goblins, but you look at something like Thistlethorn, that's a forest goblin or a fuzzmonk. That's not a typical fantasy trope. That's something that they really kind of created. That's one of the great things about the line is that they've been able to integrate characters that we are very familiar with from mythology and from fantasy, minotaurs, all stuff like that, along with stuff that we've never seen before that makes it feel super, super fresh. Orcs are one of those kind of common fantasy tropes. I mean, obviously super big in, you know, Tolkien. You know, Tolkien with all of the orcs and the Uruk-hai. I actually think I read somewhere before, Tolkien might have been the first one to use the phrase orc. I believe I actually read that somewhere. But regardless, it certainly became a fixture in high fantasy type stories. I can remember, I got my Dungeons and Dragons shirt on. I can remember playing Dungeons and Dragons as a kid, and orcs were one of those very typical type of opponents that our questing party had to go up against. We continually would fight against orcs. So very, very common. And I think that a lot of people, because of that familiarity, it's been one of the races that are very, very popular for people in the line. Additionally, the fact that they lend themselves well to army building, I think that helps also. People like to build out large displays. People like to build out armies. And when you think about orcs, I know when I think about orcs, I think about like the Battle of Helm's Deep from Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. I think about that massive battle with all of the Uruk-hai and everything allayed before Helm's Deep. That kind of crazy army is what I imagine when I think of this type of a race. So there's that aspect as well. I think people, when they buy orcs, they tend to buy multiple orcs. Now, green orcs are something that have been a little hard to come by in the line for quite some time. There is a new green orc coming in the Irithyr wave. Vorthog has not only that brand new orc head with the beard, but Vorthog also comes with a fully helmeted orc head, the one that has the jaw exposed. They even put some cool like war paint on his jaw to differentiate that head. So we're going to have green orcs coming soon once Irithyr hits. But before we get to that, the last green orc we had that wasn't a female, because we did get the female green orcs in Advent of Decay, but the last one that we've had male orc was Colosseum. So the Orc Legion Builder number 3, which is most people call the Colosseum Orc, that was the last green orc that we had. We got a couple of them in Wave 1. Then we got, so we got a couple. In Wave 1, we got Urzok, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. We got Urku, and then we got the Orc Legion Builder. Then we got the Orc Legion Builder number 3 in Colosseum. That's all the green orcs that we've gotten that aren't females. So it's been a while. Colosseum was a long time ago. So obviously people want their green orcs. I've talked in the past on the show that one of the things I've seen people doing a lot lately is taking like the Kronov figure or even the Purplor and totally repainting the body to make it into a green orc. Purplor comes with an orc head, a purple one, albeit, but repainting that, I've seen a lot of people doing really cool stuff with that. Actually, one of the orcs I'm going to show, the one I showed today, the Orc Cleric, that actually started as a Kronov. So that's an option as well. Lots of cool things you can do with orcs. And realistically, across all of the custom makers, the 3D printing companies like My Action Figure Customs and Planetary Dog Toys, they've done a ton of different orc heads over time, giving you a lot of cool variety. So very, very cool. Definitely one of the more popular races that I've seen customizers work with. So I brought this one out. This is my Urzok. Now, this is obviously on a lot of new Mythic Legions collectors' wish lists. Urzok, and yes, I do display Urzok without the face paint head. I'm probably in the minority when it comes to that. I'll explain why in a moment. But Urzok was part of the first ever Mythic Legions wave, that 1.0 Kickstarter fueled wave. He has not been released thus far, re-released thus far. Because of that, he's a pretty tough one to come by. The reality is those figures from that first wave, they were produced in so much smaller quantities than the lines are being produced now. A line like Irithyr sold so many more units than that first wave when this was first being introduced. And it's a supply and demand. There is just not a big supply of these figures to go around, which is why we see characters like Urzok springing up in price. Urzok, I think, is a very special orc because to me, Urzok is the figure that really helped get Mythic Legions 1.0 Kickstarter over that hump. So I know a lot of people who watch the show enjoy when I kind of tell stories of the good old days. I figured I'll tell a little story for those that may not have been around at that time. They may not remember. So Urzok was actually one of the figures pictured in some of the initial marketing and advertising for Mythic Legions 1. However, fans were admittedly a little disappointed when the Kickstarter went live and Urzok was not available to purchase. He was actually not one of the original characters that was available for the pledge limit. Originally, the figures you could pledge on, including if you bought the all-in and got all of them, did not include the orc. Even though he was pictured there in the promotional materials, he was one of the stretch goals. The reason for that is because of his armor. So obviously, he's got the new head. He's got the Orc Head that's not available on the other figures. But if you looked at all of the figures that were available in the initial pledge goals, none of them came with the spiky armor. So the orcs, and I mean, we've seen this armor so many times since this point. It's been used on a variety of cool characters, but these spiky leg pieces here, let me move his sword, the spiky leg pieces, the spiky feet, obviously the spiky pauldrons, and the gauntlets, all of those were first shown on this particular figure. They were not part of any of those other figures that were readily available, which means they weren't in the initial tooling patterns. The horsemen needed to not only meet their minimum funding goal, but they needed to hit certain stretch amounts to be able to afford the additional tooling that would have been necessary to put this together. That being said, for even those who were around for the Advent of Decay Kickstarter, the Advent of Decay Kickstarter funded in less than 24 hours. I mean, it went live and almost immediately everyone knew this thing was going to fund. And then it just became, an exercise in how quickly they could show us stretch goals. I mean, stretch goals were opening repeatedly, so fast. That was not the case with Mythic Legions 1.0. We actually got a few weeks, I believe, into the campaign, and it had not met its initial funding goal yet. Now, that may seem crazy considering how popular Mythic Legions is today, and even how much money the original Kickstarter made. It blew away its funding goal in the end, but it took a little while to get there. And the way they got it over the hump was with Urzok. So they heard the fans say, we love this, but we want our orc. We want this orc Urzok. Please give him to us. So there was a point where before the funding goal had been met, they talked to the factory, they changed around some tooling patterns, and they were actually able to open up a couple characters early before they actually got to needing those funding goals. They opened up Urzok, Boggoblin, and they actually opened up Malleus. And at that point, they hadn't even shown Malleus yet. But because Malleus uses those spiky armor pieces, they were able to open all of that up. Boggoblin doesn't use those pieces. Boggoblin uses a dwarf body, which was already part of the tooling because there were, a number of dwarves in the initial offerings. The only new part they had to figure out for Boggoblin was obviously his head. So they opened up those three figures, and I remember almost overnight the funding just spiked. The addition of those three characters, led by Urzok here, that really helped lead the way to push Mythic Legions over the top. And then once it got its funding goal met and those stretch goals started opening up, it was just a march. Every time one of those stretch goals opened up, it was like, okay, stretch goal opens. Everyone who was pledging added, I think they were $33 a piece at that point. So they would open up 2 figures in a stretch goal. Everyone minimally would add $66 to their pledge. Everyone's like, I need those 2 figures, 66. So immediately 2 new figures would open up. The pledge would jump up. They'd get to that next level. 2 more figures would open up, etc., etc. Again, all led by Urzok and the popularity of the orcs. So early on, when we got these figures in hand, we had this orc. Oh, by the way, I said that I display Urzok this way, not with the face paint, for 2 reasons. I know the face paint's awesome. I love that head. This is how Urzok was originally shown. So I like to display him like this because this was the first image of Urzok that I saw, had this look to it, this non-marked head. So that's why I display it that way. I also like that marked head. To me, it didn't look like war paint. It looked more like some kind of like ceremonial, like almost like magical type runes or something. So one of my early Mythic Legions customs was an orc like shaman, and I used that head on my orc shaman. It's actually still in the case. So that's why I display Urzok that way. But when we got these figures in hand, early on, we had 2 different orc heads. So we had the unhelmeted head that we see with Urzok here, and Urzok came with the 2 heads, the regular one and the face paint. So like a lot of people, I immediately had to get a second orc body to throw that second head on so I could have 2 versions. Then we also got the Orc Legion Builder 1 and Urku, both of whom have the helmeted orc head. Now, those orc heads, up until we get to the upcoming Vorthog, have every orc that's come out has had one of those 2 heads, or in some cases, both of those heads. That opened the door early on for creators to give us modifications of these heads that we could kind of start to differentiate our orc armies a little bit. So this is the time before all of the 3D printing. Before, My Action Figure Customs was out there putting out these heads, before Planetary Dog and Wolf King and Brian Burke and everyone that's doing this cool stuff now, this was a point where really the place to get custom heads was eBay, and there was a seller on eBay named G.I. Joe Eben. So G.I. Joe Eben, he, recast different things, but he wasn't just recasting 4 Horseman heads, because that's a no-no. Since day one, the Horsemen have said, look, if you're going to cast our stuff, if you're going to make customs out of it, you've got to significantly modify it. And that's what he did. So the figure that I showed today on my social media was this character here. So this is my Orc Cleric. In Dungeons and Dragons lore, by the way, the god of the Oggs, the deity of the orcs, is a character called Grummish. So Grummish, or Grummish the One-Eyed, he is, in that mythology, the character that the orcs worship. I can remember back when I was a kid, those Dungeons and Dragons books, there was one book in particular I loved called Legends and Lore. And actually, before Legends and Lore, the original name of that book was actually called Deities and Demigods. But that book, when I had it, the name on the cover I had was Legends and Lore. It had an awesome illustration of Odin riding his horse Sleipnir, a big spear in hand. Is really, really cool. But in that book, I remember going through it, just looking and reading all the stories, and it was a mix of information about pantheons that they had brought into Dungeons and Dragons that exist in our world. So there was a whole section on Greek mythology and a whole section on Egyptian mythology and Norse mythology. So Odin and Anubis and Zeus, they were all in this book. But then they also had characters that were totally fantasy based. So a lot of these Dungeons and Dragons races, they had the Spider Queen, Loth, who's, worshipped by the Drow elves. And they had Grummish the One-Eyed, who's worshipped by the orcs. This is a custom that I put together that I showed on Monday. Uses a wonderful head from Planetary Dog Toys. I just mentioned that Sable was on. I mentioned that I had used one of his pieces. Love this head. This particular custom, I did a show a while ago about using 12-inch or 1/6 scale weapons and armor and so forth on Mythic Legions ogres, because these are about 9 inches, but they're so bulky that I find that a lot of those 1/12 scale weapons and accessories work really well, and that's what I turn to here. So this fur and leather armor is from an Asmus Toys, a Lord of the Rings Grishnak figure. Pick this up online, and just it looks so cool on these figures. The gauntlets that he's got are actually from the same figure. I had to modify them. I actually sliced them and sliced some of the Mythic Legions ogre gauntlets as well to create these. But I built this. Grummish is supposed to have a big spear, so I actually used one of those spear toppers from Wolf King Customs. I painted that up. This is actually one that broke, so I thought that looked cool here. Couldn't ship it to a customer for Len. I couldn't send it to Len so he could fill an order because it was broken, so I put it there. Once I had Grummish, I said, well, I need to have one of his clerics, because in Dungeons and Dragons, the clerics of Grummish, in solidarity with their one-eyed deity, they actually pluck one of their eyes out as like a symbol of loyalty to Grummish. So G.I. Joe Eben had done this head, and I was actually talking to him today. I posted this on Instagram, and he commented on the post, and he said, hey, that's one of my modifications. And I asked him, did you actually use real gauze, like real medical tape for the bandage? Because if you get this in hand, and you can buy this head unpainted on eBay, if you look at it, the detail on the bandage, it looks so realistic. And that's totally what it is. He took actual, medical tape, and he taped it onto the head before he molded and cast it. Before he, cast these, he made that modification. It's a really cool head. It paints like a dream, and that's what I did here. I mentioned that I took a Chronaw body, I repainted the torso and the arm along with the head to create this figure. Now I also gave him, some new feet from a Lord of the Rings figure, some different armor here. This lower piece here that he's got, that's from a Lord of the Rings King Theoden figure. I just wanted to make them look a little bit different. But these heads, I did this today, but this is a head. It's actually the second time I painted a head like this. I have another one in the case. These were the first Orc heads that I remember using in customs, and he did a bunch of them. Here's another one I have that you may have seen on my website. So this is my Orc Archer that I have, and this is, what he did was he took that Orc head, he took that like Urzok head, and he sculpted that additional here and that additional facial here there that gave it that different look. At the end of the day, if you compare this to Urzok, they obviously have the same facial features because of that same base sculpture. But it's different enough that, especially early on, when I wanted to start building out my Orc Legions, these little changes really allowed me to do so. Here's the last one I'll show from G.I. Joe Eben. And you can see this. This one just has, the orc with the beard type there. That gives it a little bit of a different look. And obviously this was offered long before Vorthog with his beard was offered. So this is pretty cool. The fact that, we've had these. I've seen actually my friend Joe Vassapolo, fellow customizer who I've had the, privilege of hanging out with at the last few G-Con events. He's used a bunch of these heads. He actually doesn't even only put them on Mythic Legions. He's put them on a bunch of other figures and really kind of integrated those into his Mythic Legions display. He had a bunch of them on exhibit at Legions Con last year. Very cool. So those were some of the earliest Orc custom heads, and you can still buy them. I just bought the bandaged one recently, specifically to make that figure. So I know that is still available, and I believe the other ones are available as well. So once again, it's GI_Joe_Eben, EBEN. You can look him up on eBay, or just look up Custom Mythic Legions head, and I'm sure that you'll find him as well. I'm going to go to the comments here to see if anyone's asking anything. Nicholas saying Vortharg looks noble, determined, and amazing. Matt excited for that figure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of cool new parts too. So in addition to that head, obviously he's got the bare hands and feet, but new torso, really crazy looking new pauldrons, new waist piece, new loin piece. A lot of really cool stuff on that figure. David, nice to have you here. Josiah, Deities and Demigods. Yes, awesome book. I have the original sitting on my shelf that I refer to periodically. Yeah, I've actually been I've wanted to pick up a few of those old books. I really want to get a copy of Legends and Lore. I really want to get a couple, like a Monster Manual 2. I mean, just pouring through those things. I can find them all digitally. Like I've done a number of customs based on some of the artwork in like Monster Manual. So I have digital versions of it that I can refer to, but to actually have that physical piece. There was a whole series of Dungeons and Dragons books they called the Orange Spine books. That was my era. All of those orange spine ones, those are the ones that I really want. I'd love to just have all of those on the bookshelf just to have. So outside of those custom heads, let's talk for a minute about just the Mythic Legions line itself. So orcs, I spent a lot of time talking about green-skinned orcs, which I think those are the most popular. When people think orcs, they genuinely think about the green-skinned ones. But I said pink skin. I have my Mezco pink skulls literally staring at me, laughing at me. So I had pink on the brain. The Four Horsemen have given us already some sub races in this line. So obviously the first sub race they gave us was the Shadow Orc. And we've only gotten one of them so far. So in the Covenant of Shadows wave, we got Gorthok, the Shadow Orc. Now, Gorthok came with two heads. He came with both the unhelmeted Orc head and the helmeted head. So right out of the gate, you could buy two of those figures and have two distinct looks. We haven't gotten any other Shadow Orcs yet. So that's a race that, hopefully we'll see expanded on. If you checked out my show a few weeks ago, I actually painted a goblin with those same colors, made myself a shadow goblin before that evening show, I didn't even intend to do that. I just did it on the fly because I was like, hey, this will be fun. It'll be something to do live. And once I was done with it, I loved it. And it's on display now. They also gave us half orcs. So this figure, talking about the females from the line, Advent of Decay introduced female figures into Mythic Legions, including female orcs. So we got Orc Legion Builder 2, which is the female. We got Queen Urxa and the Barbarian warrior figure. I don't say Barbarian Builder. The Barbarian warrior figure that came with actually 3 heads, including this one. So this one we got right here. This is a half orc. And it's interesting because when they introduced this head, this was one of the stretch goals. Drew, thank you for the nice words on the Shadow Goblin. When they introduced this head, they did it in a really subtle way. At the end of Advent of Decay, the price, the bids were going so high, the pledges were going so high, they couldn't open up stretch goals fast enough. They didn't want to put more figures in because there was already a 40-something figure wave. So they started adding, additional heads to figures. They started adding additional weapons that actually originally weren't supposed to come with figures. They were only supposed to be in the weapons packs, ended up making their way into the figures, which was great to see, great to get some of those pieces and not only having to buy weapons packs to get those new weapons. But one of the heads that they threw in there at the end was this half orc head on the Barbarian. And I remember when they announced that, a bunch of people just glossed over it. And I was super excited because I was like, that's a brand new race. Like this is a half orc. Like this is them genuinely acknowledging that half orcs exist, which was cool because I had done this custom long before that point. So this is my male half orc. And it's a really super simple recipe. all this was a barbarian builder body that I darkened up a little bit. I added some dirt and some grime to him to make him look like he's, obviously, been through some stuff. And then I just took one of the orc heads that I had lying around, and I'm actually not even positive. This might have actually been a shadow orc at one point. But I took one of those heads. Actually, no, looking at the helmet itself, looking at that color helmet, this must have come from an Orc Legion builder, the first one. But what I did with this, like whenever I paint helmets like this, when I paint heads like that are helmeted, these helmets come off. I've done a show in the past about removing Mythic Legions parts that aren't technically meant to be removed. This is an example of that. Removing that helmet is going to allow you to paint the ears and to paint the chin area without worrying about getting some overpaint on the helmet itself. I find that to be a much, much cleaner way, because that's what they do at the factory. At the factory, they'll paint that piece before they put that helmet on. So it makes sense to me. But I did that, really, really like that, because again, it just super simple custom, but it adds a little bit to the display. I think adds that new sub race of orc. And I always imagine, me personally, I imagine the half orcs kind of not getting a lot of respect from their full orc brethren. They're kind of like the lowest rung in orc society because they're not pure-blooded orcs. They've got the filthy human blood in them. So I kind of like that approach. Behind me, we got the Fury Orcs. So that incredibly striking red skin tone, very, very cool. I remember when they introduced this character, immediately I just loved the way that looked. I was also admittedly a little frustrated because I had previously repainted an entire figure red to do a red-skinned like Ifrit, like a genie type character. I had totally repainted him. If you watch my show, you know that I don't love repainting full figures. I don't love painting joints, but I wanted one so badly that I did it. So then for them to introduce this, I was like, okay, you got me. It's bound to happen when you make this many customs. It's inevitable that sometimes you are going to make something that they will do down the road, and they will do it better. But this, I always thought was a really cool figure. Like Gorthok, came with the two heads, came with the unhelmeted head and the helmeted head. So just buying these two figures, buy two of these figures, I should say, you can get yourself a couple different looks on them. I love the Fury Clan Orc, in part because they've said that Fury Clan is not unique to orcs, that there are other Fury Clan members. I've done a number of other Fury Clan characters. I think recently I showed an elf, a Fury Clan elf. I'm repainting the head of the elf Legion builder red. I've got a number of others that I haven't shown yet. I've actually started thinking of the Fury Clan almost being like a gang. So I'm kind of approaching it from that way. They're like this, like they're not loyal to any one faction. They're just kind of a gang of destruction unto themselves. So building off of that is a lot of fun. And I also wanted to have some female representation. So this is a super easy recipe that you can follow that I think is very, very effective. So this is my female Fury Orc. And I think when I actually have them on display, I've got her between the two male Fury Orcs, and it just absolutely displays wonderfully. Super, super easy recipe here. This is a Zarya body, so Zarya the Red Demon. This is the figure that starts with. She's already got that red skin tone. She's even got those like markings that kind of look like some cool like tribal like tattoos. Really, really dig that. All I did here was obviously Zarya comes with hooved feet, so I replaced those feet. Very simple. Just pop those ankles out with the hooves, throw some other feet in there. So she's got regular feet. And then all I did here with the helmet was take one of those orc heads. And actually, I think this one was the half orc head, but this would work fine with either the half orc head or the female orc head that's fully helmeted. Either one of those. I painted these. Now, this particular one, I didn't remove the helmet. I just actually painted around the helmet on this one, but I just painted it a little shade of red to get myself that female Fury Orc. And then I gave her a bunch of weapons. I like, she's got these, those bone-handled blades along her back. I like the way that looks, how it comes up the back and stuff. Kind of reminds me a little bit about Legolas from Lord of the Rings and his swords. But that's a really easy custom that you can do. I just showed two really easy customs that you can do to build on some of the existing sub-races that they have. So they've already given us half orcs and they've given us Fury Orcs. They only gave us a male Fury Orc. Let's build a female. They only gave us a female half orc. Let's build a male. Very, very cool stuff. I haven't done it with a Shadow Orc yet, though. We've got a male Shadow Orc. I haven't built a female Shadow Orc, but that's absolutely something that I could do. Just off the top of my head, I would probably use the arms and the upper legs from Ravina, because she's got that black. On her, it doesn't look like skin. On her, took that figure and removed those parts, maybe swap those out for some armor from like that barbarian builder figure, like a spiky armor. You'd have that black. The Shadow Orcs had kind of those birthmarky type looking things. Put a few of those birthmarks on her very, very sparingly. Less is more. Paint one of these orc heads or even one of the Urxa heads. If you get an extra Urxa, paint that up to have the black skin, and you could totally make yourself a pretty cool female Shadow Orc. There you go, Drew. You're saying that would be awesome. I haven't done one yet, so go ahead. You can take that one. So I mentioned that all of these heads I showed that were from G.I. Joe Eben, those are not 3D printed. Those are actually cast heads. I mentioned that those were some of the earliest orc customs I did before the 3D printers were up and running, before all of these different 3D printing companies were doing what they were doing. But those companies have done a ton of orc heads. Ironically, I don't have very many on display. I've had a lot of them over the years and I've painted them up, but for whatever reason, they tend to have been ones that I've ended up selling. I do have this one here. This is one that I think is pretty cool, and it's on a recipe that, once again, is something a little bit different. So this is my Dwarf. So Dwarf, my Dwarf Orc type custom. This is something that, once again, my friend Joe Vassapolo, I saw him do for the first time. I saw him, I believe it was the first G-Con that I went to where I first met Joe, and he had a Dwarf with him. And I had never thought to make a Dwarf Orc combination. And I thought that was really fun. That was really ingenious. Now, obviously, you could just, take a dwarf body and put an orc head on it. But that felt a little too easy. So what I remember Joe doing and what I did here as well was I actually used regular upper legs, because on Mythic Legions, the parts that make it a dwarf, by the way, the upper arms are exactly the same between all the 1.0 figures, dwarves, knights, whatever. It's the lower arms that are a little bit shorter, especially the gauntlets, and the legs. So the upper legs on a dwarf and the lower legs are considerably shorter. In this particular case, I used regular upper legs, but I used the dwarf lower legs. So this build comes in somewhere between a dwarf and a full-size figure. To me, it's a perfect combination. It is legitimately a dwarf. This particular one, I gave him, once again, some Lord of the Rings feet. You see me do that a lot, especially the Lord of the Rings Uruk-hai figures. I love to swap out those feet. I just think they look so good on Mythic Legions, especially on these orcs. But this particular head, this is one from My Action Figure Customs. This is one that I believe was sculpted by Arlen Peltier. Really cool head, fully armored. There was actually a couple like this. One of them didn't have the lower jaw fully armored. It was just the top part. That was really cool as well. I liked this one myself because it looked so much different than the other Orc heads, because it had that full lower jaw. Just such an imposing looking head. Painted absolutely wonderfully, and it worked, in my opinion, really well on this just brute of a dwarf orc type figure. Got that cape on the back from Lord of the Rings, looks really good. This club comes from actually this one, I think this one is actually from a WWE Create a Superstar figure. I think that's where that one came from. So that's something else that you can do. Play around with the builds. Play around with the parts that you use, just to get a different look. I mean, use some of those dwarf, lower armors, the gauntlets. Use some of those dwarf lower legs or whatever, or dwarf feet. By messing around with the build, you can get some different variety in your legions as well. Not to mention, obviously, if you're going to go and start using the third-party heads, that's going to give you a wide variety. Planetary Dog Toys, they've got a ton of different orc heads they've done. They've even done some that actually have like adapters in the chins that you can put the Mythic Legions horn adapters. You can actually put those in like the chin of these heads. So it's almost like you can make an orc with this helmet on with these like tusks that kind of come out. It's really, really crazy looking, but unlike anything else that they've actually released, which is cool because it gives you some nice variety. So last few things that I want to look at are, we've looked at creating different green orcs. We've looked at, building on the races that already exist. You can make your own races as well. So this is one that I've shown a number of times, but it's relevant to the conversation here. This is my Frost Orc, or actually I call it my Tundra Orc. I did this recipe, actually, I should say, as a commission for the first time. I actually had someone contact me and ask me if I would make them a blind box custom. So they were like, they gave me a budget. I asked them some questions about what they like, and they let me build whatever I want. So I built them a Frost Orc, and he absolutely loved it. I was super excited that I was able to do that for him, and it was really a cool, rewarding process for me. But as soon as I shipped out my Tundra Orc, I was bummed because he came out so good. I wanted one for myself. So I rebuilt it. I built myself another one. Again, I showed this a few weeks ago. It uses the Warcraft Arthas lower legs and lower arms. The arms plug right in. The lower legs I had to modify. But this actually also uses a really, really cool custom head that my good friend Emil Wickman did. So this is a head that eventually will be available from Wolf King Customs. It's not available yet, but it's a really scarred up looking head. I imagine the climb that the Tundra Orcs live in, the environment they live in, being a pretty harsh place to live. Lots of predators who are, scraping to get by in that harsh wasteland. So it's a tough life, and having gritty orcs, I think that makes sense. So I painted one of his eyes. It's tough to see on camera, but one of his eyes that has all the scars on it is like dead white, while the other one is yellow. Again, this is a Chronaw figure, the second figure tonight that I'm showing that uses a Chronaw. Wonderful, wonderful base to work with. I actually just ordered 2 more from Big Bad Toy Store because I was out. Wonderful figure, provides so many different recipes that you can do with it. So you can start thinking about that as well. Make a Frost Orc. We've got red orcs already, but what would a lava orc look like? Or what would think about stuff like that. What would I'm drawing a blank now. I'm trying to think of other kinds of orcs that you could do. But you can have some fun with that. You can think about different, a woodland orc. Like what would like a real like woodland orc type look like? we've got green ones, but what if it was more brown? What if it was really earthy type colors? You can have fun with stuff like that. This is one that I did a while ago where I started thinking, what if an orc wasn't evil? So all of the orcs in Mythic Legions that they've released, now obviously not everyone follows the biographies. I certainly don't follow the biographies. However, if you look at those biographies, I'm at least aware of them. All the orcs are evil. Actually, all the orcs are part of the Legion of Aerithir. So the orc race is one of those. There are some races that represent that they're across different factions. Every goblin that's been released is part of Legion of Aerithir. However, not every dwarf is part of the same faction. Some dwarves are actually part of the Legion of Aerithir, including King Bromden Ironjaw. Then there's other dwarves that are part of House of the Noble Bear, or even Zylona's flock. Even the skeletons. Most of the skeletons are part of the congregation of Necronomicus. But then you've got Scapular and Pixis, and they're all part and Keltis. They're all part of Sons of the Red Star. So it's interesting how some races are spread across different factions, but the orcs are all Aerithir. They're all evil. So I started to think, well, what would it be like if an orc wasn't evil? And the orc that I looked to do that with was Unkin. So Unkin was the first PowerCon exclusive figure that was released. Appropriate to talk about him tonight a little bit because we have the PowerCon sale coming up this weekend. But he was such a unique looking figure with his orange armor and everything. I actually didn't really care for him out of the box. The orange armor looked out of place to me, and I didn't want to display him as a Masters of the Universe tribute. So I immediately said, okay, orange armor doesn't work for me in the Legion of Aerithir. Why would he have orange armor? So I really wanted to rethink the character. And when I thought about what would be fun, I said, I'm going to make him a good guy. And not only am I going to make him a good guy, I'm going to try to go polar opposite. Instead of an evil warmongering character, I'm going to make him a good guy. I'm going to make him a monk. I'm going to make him someone that instead of looking for war and bloodshed is looking for peace and enlightenment. I thought that was really, really fun. I've since done a whole number of monk customs for a little group that I call the Order of the Stone Lotus. But this monk here was the first one that I did. This is Brother Ugash. And this actually uses parts of an Unkin. That is actually an Urzok head that I added some additional paint onto. And then this lower skirt here is from a Lord of the Rings Haradrim archer figure. And these feet, actually, he's got these really cool bare feet. All of my monks have bare feet. These were from quite some time ago. One of the first people that I got custom parts from was a gentleman named Marcus Akin. So Marcus was on the old Four Horsemen boards as Dark Horse. He was also the person that created the first Mythic Legions Facebook group that I joined, and I think it was actually called Realm of Mythos. Great guy. He lives over in the UK. I get a bunch of pieces from him, including these really cool orc feet that he cast. So I use those here on my custom orc monk. Gave him those orc beads and stuff. That's another thing that I think is a lot of fun with customizing, is just throwing characters on their head. Like thinking about everything that's expected with a character or a race or a character class or whatever, and saying like, well, what if I did the exact opposite? These are the types of things I think about when I customize. Not always. Sometimes it's just I try to make a cool looking figure. Sometimes I get a third party head and I just paint it up and say, this is a really cool head. What am I going to put this on? But other times when I'm trying to build out specific types of characters, where I'm trying to add some variety to the display, this is the thought process that I have, that I take myself through. How do I take this well-known race, how do I flip it on its head? And that's literally how an orc monk came to be. Now, the last thing I'll show is something, once again, I've also shown before. There's definitely going to be some repeat stuff. I mean, if you've tuned in for a while, this is episode 12 of Mythic Conversations. So the original Mythic Conversations on Facebook got up to episode 13, which is crazy. It means next week we will have had just as many episodes here on YouTube as the original Facebook. So in a couple weeks, we'll actually have exceeded that, which is pretty cool. But the point is that 26 episodes in or whatever, as many customs as I have, I only have so many. So there's definitely going to be stuff that gets brought up time and time again because it's relevant to the conversation at hand. And the thing that I want to talk about tonight, when I'm talking about orcs, is how to use orc parts for not orcs. That's the last point that I'll really make this evening. So I'm sure you've all seen this. This is my first real Mythic Legions custom. And while it's gone through a couple changes over time, it is still largely the original configuration. So I've told this story a number of times, but for anyone that never heard it, when that first Mythic Legions Kickstarter was going on, they introduced the characters of Azar and Zazar. But when they first introduced them, they just had silhouettes. They didn't even have, they had names in silhouettes. And they weren't even actual silhouettes of the Horned Demons. They were like a generic Silver Knight Legion Builder silhouette. That's what they used for all of the figures generically at first. So when I first saw those names, Azar and Zazar, number one, I knew they had to go together because they were so similar. And I imagined them as Jinn. And the reason Zazar had a very, both of them, Zazar and Zazar, had very, very kind of Middle Eastern, Arabian Nights type feeling names to me. And then when I looked at that Orc Head, I said, you know what? That would make a wonderful, wonderful genie type head. I really, really dug that. Obviously, it wasn't to be. When the line was actually released, we did not get a blue skin Jinn. We got the demon, but I couldn't get out of my head. So I took that Zazar body. I swapped out some armor from a Gold Knight Legion builder. These feet actually came from a Sir Valgard. It's crazy. I've had this forever, but it's funny when I talk to people. Like, I've literally just shown you a custom that uses an Urzok head and now something that uses Sir Valgard feet. That shows how early on, before these figures were worth what they were today, how I used to just tear these things apart. I still do. But this cool ponytail that I got from eBay from an online seller totally transforms it to me. Even though I know that is an orc head, it completely transforms it into a genie. So much so that I did the same thing when Purplore came out. So I did a previous Mythic Conversations where I actually built this live on the air. I built this purple skin Jinn that really just uses a Purplore body with these robes are from a Lord of the Rings, Lord Elrond figure. Added that ponytail in, some earrings. Really, really cool. These heads work really, really well as genies for me. I like them a lot. I will give you a little bit of some early info, though. If you dig this type of look, but you don't want to repaint one of the orc heads because you're like, all I can do is see it as an orc. Remember, the Zazar body is coming back. Zazar, this blue skin body, is part of the All-Stars 3 wave. So these, if you haven't pre-ordered them, they're going to be back in stock at some point. We will have access to them. One of the projects I'm actually working on right now, or getting ready to start, just put some concept art together for it, is going to be a whole set of parts to create genie characters. So if you want some of those classic looking genies, that is something I'm actually working on right now. I know that I've been doing a lot of critter customs lately. I did the Kitsunes, then I did all the Badgerines. I have a lot of other ideas for more critters, but I figured that everyone would benefit from me taking a little bit of a break from the critters to maybe focus on something else. And because genies are something that I think are really, really cool, and because it was my first Mythic customs, I said, you know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to work with Walter from Mass Customs to do something really cool, to create a series of add-on parts so you can make some cool genies and jinn and Afreet and those type of very Arabian Nights type characters. Super excited about that. They're not coming anytime soon. It will be a little while before those are totally done and I can get them over to Len and he can put them into his schedule and all that. But you heard it here first. That's a little teaser of something that's coming out that I'm really, really excited for. Drew saying, are you going to make rabbit parts? Yes, that is also something that I have the plans for as well. Rabbits are another line. You saw the Woodhaven series that was created for the Badgers and the Wolverine. Woodhaven was an idea that I came up with that I said to Len, I said, hey, when I did the kits today, I hadn't thought about this, but clearly people dig the critters. I really dig the critters. He actually had some other animal characters that he was working on that have nothing to do with me. So I said, you know what, it'd be really cool if we wrote kind of like a story that encapsulated all these characters. So that's where Woodhaven came from. There are going to be other Woodhaven releases down the road, and Drew, rabbits are one of them, and I am plural. You know what happens with rabbits. They multiply, so it won't be a rabbit. There will be a whole bunch of really, really cool rabbits that will be available. Very, very cool. So that's the stuff that I had to present tonight. A lot of different things that you can do with orcs. Super popular, whether you're just making green orcs, you're taking a Chronon, you're making a green orc, whether you're building out some of these sub-races, creating whole new types of sub-races, making dwarks out of them, or whether you're using some of these orc parts to make totally different types of characters. I think that this race provides a ton of customizing potential. And we're just talking about the races. I showed a cleric that I built here, and I showed a monk. And that's the other thing that you can do with any of these races is think about not only sub races, but think about classes. That's one of my favorite things to do. Like, what does what does an orc tinker look like, or an orc? One of them I did a while ago was an orc war drummer, where I actually used some drums from an old Muppets Palisades animal figure. You can really do that. You can start to build out not just soldiers, but other members of the orc kind of race, an orc butcher, an orc chef, things like that. You can have a lot of fun with stuff like that. So it's 8:42 now. I've got a few more minutes. I'm here. If anyone has any questions or anything they would just like to chat about, it is Mythic Conversations, and it's about that time. Hit me up in the chat, and we will have that conversation. I don't like to drink during the show if I can avoid it, but it is terribly warm down here tonight, so it is appropriate. So what's going on? What do we got happening? Daniel, nice to have you here. Thank you very much for joining. Yeah, when that Vorthog comes out, I guarantee you there's going to be some very, very cool customs that people do with that whole line. That whole Erethyr line, all those extra pieces. As someone who is customized as much as I have, the 1.0 parts before Advent of Decay hit, I had used 1.0 parts obviously for a while at that point, a couple of years, having access to a whole big expansion of the parts library. That was incredible. What the 3D printing companies have done is nothing short of amazing, but there is no substitute for new actual Mythic Legions parts. Getting those new bodies in, those new heads, the new armor, the new weapons, getting all those pieces in, that is such an incredibly cool experience, not only as a collector. I mean, I love to open them up and just put them on display, like the Hellfire Goblin. I ordered so many of those Hellfire Goblins just because looking at it, I was like, oh, you can display it with the long tongue or with the short tongue, and then with or without the helmet. And right there, I was like, there's like so many different ways that I can display that one figure before I even start thinking about customs, just as is. So I'm super excited for when that's going to happen. Nicholas saying the best thing about this line for me is how well it fits into creative writing, storytelling. The D&D books are really good for that. Absolutely. I mean, I've said it many times. I love the fact that this line taps in to my sense of nostalgia for Dungeons and Dragons. Not that it is a Dungeons and Dragons line, but that sense of creative white space. There's not a movie or a comic book or a television show or something that these are based on so heavily where I feel like I can't deviate from that. The fact that these characters really feel like such a world that I can morph and shape and add to. That is also, Nicholas, my favorite part of this line. It's why I make all the customs. It's why I started doing this. And I continue, by the way, to see more and more people begin customizing. Obviously, there's not a ton. I haven't seen a ton of new fans coming into the line lately, which makes sense. There's no new product to buy yet. Whenever there's new product that's shipping, that's for pre-order, that's when you see new fans really come into the line. But what I am seeing a lot lately is existing fans that I think are trying to expand on their love of the line, and they're buying their first 3D parts, or they're buying some paints and they're starting to customize. I continue to see people who regularly tag me and thank me for a recipe that I provided that got them started on customizing. I mean, thank you to everyone that does that. I'm truly honored that my recipes help you out. That's why I offer them. But very cool. And it is, once you start doing that, I jokingly, whenever anyone posts their first custom, especially if they post their first custom and thank me, I always jokingly respond and say, like, welcome to the downward spiral that is action figure customizing, because it is a spiral. Like, once you start doing this, you look at these figures in a totally new way, because a new wave will come out and you're like excited and you're like, oh, I could get that guy and that guy and that, and you're going to get them all. But then you start looking at it and go, oh, I could do this with that armor, and I could do this. I better order a few extras of these and a few extras of that. And before you know it, that 10-figure wave, you've got 40 figures in your cart, because you've got to add all of these additional figures specifically to do these cool customs. It is an awesome problem to have. Let's see. Yeah, Nicholas says, I haven't felt like this since I was a kid. I agree. It is a very fun line. I mean, I do still collect Marvel Legends. I just recently got into Mezco. I'm having a blast with Mezco, but I've also started doing some Mezco customs, which that's a whole other box of insanity that I've apparently just opened. But like Marvel Legends and stuff, even for a while, I was getting a lot of like Masterpiece Transformers, and I'm pretty comfortable with that line now. I have all the core characters I wanted, but all of those figures, I would get them and just put them on a shelf. Even Transformers, I always would joke that I'm the type of person, I display everything in bot mode. So I'm the type of person that if a Transformer came in bot mode, I would never transform it. I was thrilled it was in bot mode. I just put it right on the shelf. I don't need to see it as a jet or a car or a boombox. Boom, right on the shelf. And it's like that it's been like that for toy collecting for me forever, except for with Mythic Legions. Getting these Legions and being able to really allow it to fuel the creative spark. without that creative spark, I'm not as deep into this line. If this is just another line that's great looking figures, and again, I've collected Horseman stuff for years. I had Seventh Kingdom. I have Gothtropolis. I backed the Ravens Kickstarter. I have all of those figures. I've customized a bunch of the Raven figures, but I didn't really start customizing them until Mythic Legions. Once I started customizing Mythic Legions, then I backtracked and said, hey, what can I do with the birds? Is there some changes that I can make? And the birds are not as modular as Mythic Legions proper. They don't lend themselves as well to customizing. But I agree that if it wasn't for that aspect and the way it made me feel, the sense of creativity that it helped bring up, I definitely wouldn't be as deep into this line. I wouldn't have been introduced to the studio. I wouldn't be working with Four Horsemen Studios, and I certainly wouldn't be doing a weekly YouTube show to talk about action figure customizing. So we owe all that to the how much fun this line is. Adrian saying Transformers always had more appeal to me as robots with their weapon over being vehicles. It's funny, as a kid, actually, I actually dug the vehicle part. As a kid, I really enjoyed transforming them into vehicles, and I think I played with them more as vehicles. I remember tooling around with Prime and putting Prowl up in the back of the trailer and stuff. I remember doing that way more than fighting with them as robots. But as an adult collector, yeah, I don't have a lot of interest in displaying them. Even my Dinobots, even the Dinobots are the one character that I would argue that the alt mode is as cool as the robot mode. But even my Dinobots, I have, and the one I'm looking up there because they're right there. When I say I collect Masterpiece Transformers, what I should say is I collect some Masterpiece Transformers and a whole lot of third-party stuff that fits into that display. So all of the Dinobots I have are by Fans Toys, and they're all as actual bots. The only one that's not Fans Toys is Grimlock. I used to have the actual Hasbro Grimlock, the one that was a Toys R Us exclusive, but I recently changed that for an oversized one they did that's towers, and it's awesome. Matt saying, since Legions Con, I've built 25 more customs. Can't wait for the Legion builders to be in stock. Yeah, I haven't heard any news about when that's going to be. I do know that it's still in the plans. That is going to be game changer. They were talking about that on Walter Hagen's live broadcast today on the Cabal about that point. I think everyone right now is kind of holding their breath for that. Everyone's waiting for the ability to get Legion builders with some regularity. I personally have said this multiple times. I think the idea of always in stock Legion builders is not a reality. I don't think that's the language that they should have been using. And I've actually told them this. I think that what it should be, and I think the only way to do always in stock is to create on demand, and that's not what they're doing. They're not printing these things to meet specific demand. What, in my conversations with them, I think they were thinking more was that Legion builders would be ordered regularly. And they even said this. Corn Boys even said on an interview, I'm not sure if it was a Legions Cast interview or the Pixel Dan one, I think it was Legions Cast, where he said, we're going to start with a certain number of Legion builders, so not all of them will be available, but then later on we'll refresh it and we'll add some different ones and swap some out, so you'll have access to some that may not have been part of the first wave. That idea to me is really what I see being a more realistic model, where it's not like they're always in stock, in infinite stock. It's the fact that they place an order for a large number, and then as those are selling, there's another order for another large order for maybe some of the same, maybe some new ones that get swapped out. However it ends up working out, I genuinely don't know how it is going to shake out in the end. However it works out, I'm super excited to have access to lower cost fodder pieces. Because like a lot of you, if I see a figure, I just mentioned that I bought 2 more Kronos. I got them from Big Bad Toy Store. It was $50 a piece. So, I'm paying what a lot of you are paying too when I'm scrambling to fill my fodder bin. So the ability to not do that, I love it as well. Awesome. Daniel earlier said, I would have been here sooner, but I totally got sucked into a custom I was painting. Hey, I wouldn't have it any other way. You can always catch the replay. So with that, I think that we're going to call it an evening. It's just coming up on 9 now. I'm going to break it down. I actually got a whole box of stuff from Wolf King Customs in the back room that I need to paint. All of those Badgerine heads and Kitsune sets and hand claws, all of those are on my workshop table right now. In my friend Zombie, his What's on the Desk Wednesday, where you show progress and you show what you're working on. I didn't show it, but that is what I'm working on today. I'm getting all of those painted. So any of you who ordered any of those painted pieces, we can hopefully get them out to you pretty soon. So once I'm done this show tonight, I will clean up, call it an evening. Maybe I'll do a little bit of painting for a while. Until then, same Mythic time, same Mythic channel next week. I'll see you on Mythic Conversations. Talk to you then.